What happened to the legends of the Lone Ranger? They wore masks, rode into gunfire, fought injustice across the Wild West, and disappeared into the sunset like ghosts of a forgotten era. But what happened when the cameras stopped rolling? What happened to the men behind the myth? The Lone Ranger, airing from 1949 to 1957, wasn't just another cowboy show. It was the heartbeat of a generation. Every child knew the call, "Hi-yo, Silver away." Every household sat in reverent silence as the masked rider and his native companion Tonto brought law and order to a lawless land. But behind that black mask, and beyond the white stallion's gallop, were real men with real stories. Some heroic, others tragic, all unforgettable. Clayton Moore, J Silverheels, John Hart, Chuck Courtney, Robert J Wilky, Becker, Perry Lopez, Frank Dova. They were more than actors. They were icons. But many paid a heavy price for the fame. Some died in silence. Some were haunted by typecasting. Some battled illness. Others simply faded away, left behind by an industry that no longer needs them. In this video, we bring you back to the dusty trails. But this time to uncover what happened after the applause ended. The scandals, the deaths, the disappearances, and the legacies that refuse to die. Subscribe to this channel now, because the truth behind Hollywood's most legendary cowboy series is far more haunting than anything you see on screen. Their stories are waiting to be told, and once you hear them, you won't forget them. 1. Clayton Moore, the Lone Ranger. He was more than just an actor in a cowboy hat. Clayton Moore was the Lone Ranger. Born Jack Carlton Moore in Chicago, he seemed destined for a different life. With his chiseled looks and athletic physique, he modeled in New York before heading west to Hollywood, starting out as a stuntman and bit player in the late 1930s. Moore gradually worked his way through serials and low-budget westerns. But everything changed in 1949 when he was offered the role of a masked rider fighting injustice in a new television show. When producer George W. Trendle asked him if he'd like to be the Lone Ranger, Moore didn't hesitate. "Mr. Trendle, I am the Lone Ranger." And for generations of viewers, he truly was. He made countless public appearances in costume, recited the Lone Ranger Creed at schools and events, and refused to play any other role that might tarnish the character's image. Even a court battle in 1978, when the rights holders tried to bar him from wearing the mask, couldn't stop him. In the public eye, he was the Lone Ranger. No scandal. 2. J Silverheels, Tonto. Long before he rode beside the Lone Ranger, J Silverheels was Harold J. Smith, a proud Mohawk from Canada's Six Nations Reserve. Born into a large family of 10 children. He was a natural athlete. Lacrosse, boxing, football, horse racing, you name it, he dominated. It wasn't Hollywood that found him. He carved his own way in, first as a stuntman in 1938 with the help of actor Joe E. Brown. Silverheels broke into films slowly, often in uncredited roles, usually typecast as nameless Indian warriors in westerns. But his presence was magnetic. And then came Key Largo in 1948, where he stood alongside Humphrey Bogart and caught the industry's attention for real. In 1949, destiny struck. Cast as Tonto in The Lone Ranger, Silverheels became a household name. He wasn't just a sidekick, he was a loyal warrior, a man of quiet strength, a symbol of honor. For a generation of viewers, he gave Native Americans a rare, dignified presence on television. But that fame came at a price. While Clayton Moore became a cultural icon, Silverheels was shackled by his role. He reprised Tonto again and again, in 2 films, commercials, and parodies, because Hollywood offered him little else. He had become, in the industry's eyes, only Tonto, spoke out against stereotyping, and even used humor to challenge racist assumptions. On The Tonight Show, when asked about marrying an Italian woman, he quipped, "To get back at Christopher Columbus." In his later years, Silverheels turned to poetry and harness racing, quietly slipping from the spotlight. His health declined through the 1970s, and he died in 1980 from stroke. But his legacy endures, not just as Tonto, but as a man who fought to change the way his people were seen. Behind the stoic face was a heart that beat for justice, on screen and off. J Silverheels didn't just ride beside the Lone Ranger. He carved a path for others to follow. 3. John Hart, The Lone Ranger, Season 3. For a single season, he wore the mask, and for the rest of his life, he bore the title of the other Lone Ranger. John Hart didn't ask for the role under those circumstances. In 1952, a contract dispute pushed Clayton Moore out of the Lone Ranger, and producers needed a replacement who could fill the boots of an American icon. Hart, with his chiseled features, 6'3" frame, and steady camera presence, was chosen to step into one of the most beloved roles in television history. Born in Los Angeles, John Lewis Hart had a solid background in acting. He trained at the Pasadena Playhouse and began his screen career with a small role in Cecil B. DeMille's The Buccaneer, 1938. But just as his career began to pick up, World War II intervened. Hart delivered a competent and respectable performance, but audiences never fully embraced him. To many, he simply wasn't the Lone Ranger. When Moore returned in 1954, Hart stepped back with quiet dignity and without bitterness. In fact, he remained grateful for the opportunity, even reprising the character decades later in light-hearted cameos on Happy Days and The Greatest American Hero. Outside of acting, Hart was deeply in love with the ocean. He surfed well into old age, splitting his time between California and Baja, Mexico. He was married for over 50 years to Canadian actress Beryl Braithwaite, whom he met on set and married just 10 days later. He passed away in 2009 at the age of 91 after suffering from dementia. While he was never fully accepted as the Lone Ranger, he carried the legacy with grace. His words near the end of his life said it best. "I've been the other Lone Ranger for 50 years. There are worse things people could call me." 4. Chuck Courtney, Dan Reed Jr. He wasn't the man behind the mask, but Chuck Courtney played the next best thing. Dan Reed Jr., the Lone Ranger's nephew and symbolic heir. With youthful energy and a clean-cut charm, Courtney added a generational bridge to the legend. But behind that boyish smile was a man whose real-life story ended in silence and shadows. Born Charles T. Courtney Jr. in Los Angeles, he had Hollywood in his blood. His mother, Elizabeth Courtney, was a well-connected costumer at Republic Pictures, and that proximity to the studio system helped open doors early. He began as a stuntman, a career path that required courage, physical grit, and anonymity. But it was the Lone Ranger that gave him visibility. As Dan Reed Jr., he appeared in several episodes during the 1950s, offering a rare look at the personal side of the titular hero, a blood relative, a legacy bearer, and a glimpse into the Lone Ranger's past. Courtney's career never reached leading man heights, but he stayed active in film and TV for decades. He had small parts in cult classics like Pet Sematary, 1989, Billy the Kid vs. Dracula, 1966, and The Rookie, 1990, often working as both actor and stunt coordinator. His face might not have been on posters, but his body of work was vast and quietly essential. But his final chapter was heartbreaking. After suffering a series of strokes, Courtney took his own life in 2000 at the age of 69. It was a tragic end for someone who had once been a symbol of youthful hope in the Western mythos. He left behind a wife, Geraldine, and 4 children. And while he may not be a household name like Moore or Silverheels, Chuck Courtney's presence in The Lone Ranger helped humanize the legend. He reminded viewers that even heroes had families, and that even those on the sidelines can carry the weight of legacy. 5. Robert J. Wilky, the unforgettable antagonist. Some faces don't need a name. They appear, and tension follows. In the golden age of television westerns, Robert J. Wilky was one such presence, a towering figure whose roles brought dramatic weight and moral contrast to every story he entered. In The Lone Ranger, he was never the masked hero, but his presence was just as vital. He was the force that tested integrity, the obstacle that made justice meaningful. Born in Cincinnati to German-American parents, Wilky's journey to film was unconventional. He worked as a lifeguard in Miami before transitioning into stunt work in Hollywood during the 1930s. That foundation in physical performance eventually led to acting roles, where his striking features and reserved intensity found their place. His breakthrough came in High Noon, 1952, where his silent menace as one of the waiting gunmen helped define a new era of suspenseful storytelling. In The Lone Ranger, Wilky played various adversaries whose very presence elevated the stakes of each episode. He wasn't a caricature of evil. He was controlled, composed, and complex. The kind of man who didn't need to shout to be feared or overact to be remembered. Yet behind the roles, Wilky was known for his calm demeanor and unexpected humor. Off-screen, friends like Claude Akins would recall that Wilky was just as formidable with a golf club as he was with a six-shooter, perhaps even more successful. He continued acting through the 70s, appearing in acclaimed films like Days of Heaven and The Magnificent Seven. His career spanned more than 4 decades, and though he rarely played the hero, he never went unnoticed. Robert Wilky passed away in 1989 after a battle with cancer, but he left behind a legacy carved into the very backbone of the Western genre. His characters may not have worn the white hat, but they gave the white hat purpose. Without the storm, the calm means little. In Robert J. Wilky was that storm, quiet, steady, and unforgettable. 6. Lyle Becker, the velvet-gloved threat. He never needed to shout or scowl. Lyle Becker could unsettle an entire room with a raised eyebrow, a thin smile, and the glint of calculation behind perfectly combed hair. In a genre full of dusty boots and blunt violence, Becker brought something different to the screen, a refined, chilling elegance. On The Lone Ranger and across countless westerns, he embodied a new kind of danger, one that wore a silk vest and spoke softly before the knife came out. Born in Philadelphia, Becker studied at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York, where he met his wife, actress Mary Rolfe. He started on stage, even making it to Broadway before moving to film. In 1952, he earned critical attention for his role as the jealous elephant trainer Klaus in Cecil B. DeMille's The Greatest Show on Earth. Hollywood took note. From there, he was cast again and again in roles that required intelligence cloaked in menace. What made him unforgettable was his ability to play men who seemed calm, reasonable, even charming, until the mask dropped. In The Lone Ranger, Becker brought that same quiet intensity to his role as Reese Kilgore, a man whose polished exterior hid cold ambition. He didn't need to raise his voice. His authority was psychological, his danger persuasive. Despite the typecasting, Becker handled it with grace. He once joked about his sons watching him lose fights on screen, saying they were disappointed. They wanted their daddy to win. Off-screen, he was a devoted husband and father of 3. In 1974, he retired from Hollywood and moved to the peaceful town of Paia on the island of Maui, trading scripts for solitude. He passed away in 2003 at the age of 88. There are no scandals, no headlines, just a long, steady career that left behind a trail of unforgettable performances. While Becker may never have worn the hero's hat, but he gave the hero something to overcome, and in doing so, elevated every scene he touched. 7. Perry Lopez, the outsider with unmistakable presence. In an era when Hollywood westerns were dominated by a single image, white hats, white faces, and whitewash stories, Perry Lopez stood out, not just for his heritage, but for the way he brought complexity, humanity, and heat to roles that were often written as one-dimensional. In The Lone Ranger, and in the broader landscape of classic film, he was the kind of actor who made every scene feel more real simply by walking into it. Born Julio Cesar Lopez in New York City, Perry was of Puerto Rican descent, an identity that shaped both his opportunities and his struggles in Hollywood. He began acting in the 1950s and quickly proved himself versatile. grounded, charismatic, and able to navigate the fine line between vulnerability and grit. In The Lone Ranger, his role as Pete Ramirez may not have dominated screen time, but it left a mark. He wasn't just the token ethnic character. He brought authenticity, grounding the story in something deeper than stereotypes. His most iconic role came later, as LT. Lou Escobar in Roman Polanski's Chinatown, 1974, where he held his own opposite Jack Nicholson. It was a quiet, steady performance. The mark of a man who knew when to command and when to yield. Lopez reprised that role in The Two Jakes, 1990, the same year he appeared in The Rookie. He never courted fame, but for those who paid attention, his face became one of those quietly crucial presences in American film. His personal life was relatively private. He married actress Claire Kelly in 1960, though the marriage was short-lived. Later years brought fewer roles, but Lopez remained a respected figure in Hollywood, especially among Latin actors navigating an industry that often failed to recognize their worth. He died in 2008 from lung cancer at the age of 78. His passing didn't make tabloid waves, but to those who remembered him, from The Lone Ranger to Chinatown, it was the loss of a steady force. Perry Lopez may never have been the face on the poster, but he was the soul behind the frame. Quiet, enduring, and impossible to ignore. 8. Frank DeCova, the scholar behind the savage. He was the man you loved to fear. Eyes sharp as flint, voice wrapped in authority, always standing at the edge of violence. In The Lone Ranger, Frank DeCova embodied the archetypal native leader, the kind Hollywood loved to dramatize. Fierce, stoic, unpredictable. But off-screen, DeCova often portrayed tribal leaders, most memorably as Chief Red Hawk. Though written through a lens of mid-century stereotypes, he infused the role with dignity, strength, and unexpected nuance. He wasn't just a foil for the masked hero. He was a mirror to another worldview, a reminder that justice, territory, and survival had different meanings depending on who you were. But it wasn't just Westerns. DeCova's career spanned gangsters, killers, military men, and even cavemen. He shocked audiences when he showed his comedic brilliance in the satirical series F Troop. The Lone Echoes of Justice, a final tribute. They wore the dust of the West like a second skin. They fired blanks, but left real impressions. And though their trails have long since faded into silence, the men who helped shape The Lone Ranger continue to echo through the halls of television history. Clayton Moore gave us a hero so pure, so unshakable. He became inseparable from the mask he wore. J Silverheels stood beside him, not behind, breaking racial barriers while quietly pushing for better representation. Hart, the reluctant stand-in, endured decades of comparison with dignity and grace. Chuck Courtney, the next generation, lived under the shadow of legends and left too soon. J Wilky, Perry Lopez, and Frank DeCova each carved their place in the Western mythos not as mere villains, but as men who gave the hero something worth fighting for. None of them were perfect. Some struggled with typecasting. Some were forgotten by the machine they helped power. Some died in silence, their stories eclipsed by newer stars and louder legends. But in truth, without them, more names we will not let time erase. Because behind every icon is a man, and behind every mask, a memory. The Lone Ranger may have ridden alone, but he never stood alone.